My name is Maria Ortega, and for many years my identity was chalk, books, and the smiles of my students in a small, dusty town on the Mexican border. I was a teacher, a woman who believed in the power of words and the promise of a better future, built with patience and education. My life was simple, woven from the threads of daily routine, love for my community, and above all, for my daughter, Sophia. This story is not about the woman I was, but about the shadow I was forced to become. Before we delve into the abyss that swallowed my soul, I ask that if you feel there are voices that need to be heard, you subscribe to this channel so we can reach 1,000 supporters. Comment what part of the world you're listening from. Knowing I'm not alone gives me the strength to continue. Sophia was my sun, the melody that filled the silence of our small home. At 17, she carried a glimmer of hope in her eyes that our town could no longer contain. She dreamed of being a doctor, of crossing the border not out of desperation but ambition, to study and one day return to help our people. We talked for nights on end about the risks, about the ache of missing each other that would tear our chests apart, but her desire was a force of nature. With a heavy heart, I helped her save every penny, blessed her journey, and watched her leave with the promise of a brilliant future. That was the last time I saw my daughter with her soul intact, full of dreams that the American desert would soon devour without mercy. The news came like a thunderclap from a cloudless sky, a frigid phone call from an American official whose voice carried not an ounce of compassion. The words were procedural, empty, found, incident, gang violence. Each syllable was a blow that shattered me from the inside, turning my world of vibrant colors into a gray blur of incomprehensible pain. Sophia, my girl, my light, reduced to bureaucratic jargon. In that moment, the floor disappeared from beneath my feet, and I fell into a vacuum of silence and agony, where the only sound was the echo of her laughter, now turned into a torture for my memory. The teacher in me died right there, and something much older and darker began to awaken in her ashes. I crossed the border, but not like my daughter, full of hope. I was a ghost, moved only by the need to see her face one last time. The environment was cold, impersonal. Hospital corridors that smelled of disinfectant, police station rooms where the air was heavy with indifference. I was taken to a morgue of cold, metallic light. There, under a white sheet, was what remained of my son. Her body, marked by the brutality of monsters who breathe the same air we do, was a silent testament to the failure of a world that promises safety and delivers chaos. I kissed her cold forehead, and in that icy touch, I made a silent promise. There would be no peace, no rest, until justice, my justice, was served. At the police station, the indifference I felt over. The phone took shape in the weary face of Detective Miller. He handed me a box with Sophia's belongings, talking about statistics, the complexity of border violence, and how cases like hers were rarely solved. Gang violence, he repeated, the phrase sounding like an excuse for inaction. To him, Sophia was just another number in a forgotten file, an anonymous immigrant whose tragic fate was regrettable, but ultimately insignificant to the system. He offered me coffee and empty words of comfort, little knowing that with his apathy he wasn't closing a case, but signing the death warrant of every single culprit. I returned to a cheap motel room, the smell of mildew and loneliness filling the air. The small cardboard box on the bed was all I had left of Sophia. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside, her wallet, a few pictures of us, and a small notebook where she jotted down her thoughts and the names of people she met at her new job. The system had discarded her, but there, in those objects, her essence still pulsed. I felt more than just grief. A new emotion, cold and sharp as steel, began to take hold of me. It was rage, a pure, crystalline fury, directed not only at the murderers, but at the system that allowed them to operate in the shadows with impunity, treating lives like my daughter's as collateral damage. I spent the night awake, leafing through Sophia's notebook. Amidst notes about her job at a diner, there was a name that repeated, followed by an address and a phone number, Ricardo. She described the fear in his eyes, the way he watched her. It was a small clue, insignificant to an overwhelmed police force, but for a mother whose sole purpose was now the truth, it was a thread of hope, a path to follow. Sophia's shaky handwriting in the last note about him was a posthumous cry for help. In that moment, I understood that justice would not come from a badge or a courtroom. Justice would have to come from my own hands. With the first ray of sun invading the foul room, my decision was made. I would not return to Mexico to bury my daughter and my future. I would stay. I would learn to navigate the world of shadows that had taken her from me. I would use my intelligence, my powers of observation, no longer to teach children, but to track predators. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but the purpose was greater. I would find Ricardo, and after him, I would find all the others. One by one, they would learn what it means to take everything from a mother. They would not be taken to a courthouse. They would be brought to my judgment, and the sentence would be final. The hunt had begun. Finding Ricardo was easier than I had imagined. The address in Sophia's notebook led to a rundown bar on the outskirts of El Paso, a place where hope went to die between bottles of cheap beer and the sound of loud, distorted music. I watched him for 2 days, sitting in my old car across the street, learning his habits, his routine. He wasn't an imposing monster, but a mediocre man with a beer belly and a vacant look that only came alive when he told a dirty joke to his friends. Seeing the man who haunted my daughter's last notes, living his banal life, laughing and drinking as if he didn't have a speck of blood on his soul, cemented the fragile resolution I carried in my chest. The fear was still there, but now it had a companion, a cold, patient hatred. On the 3rd night, I followed him. He left the bar, stumbling slightly, and headed into a dark alley to relieve himself against a graffiti-covered wall. My heart was beating so hard it felt like it would tear through my chest. With trembling hands, I grabbed the tire iron I had taken from the trunk. The metal was heavy and cold, an extension of the new reality taking hold of me. I approached in silence, my worn-out sneakers making no sound on the dirty asphalt. When he turned around, I called his name, Ricardo. He looked at me, confused, not recognizing the face of a grieving mother. Then I said the name that connected him to his sin, the name that would be his sentence, Sophia. The confusion in his eyes turned into a flash of recognition, and then a cruel disdain. "Oh, the little Mexican girl," he sneered, a crooked smile forming on his lips. "She got what she deserved, didn't know how to keep her mouth shut." Those words were the trigger. The teacher, the mother, the woman I was, it all disintegrated in that instant, leaving only the wounded. Animal. He took a step toward me, perhaps to intimidate me, to hurt me, but he didn't see a fragile woman. He saw the end. With a scream that tore from my own throat, I raised the tire iron and swung. The first blow was clumsy, hitting his shoulder, but the second, fueled by months of pent-up pain, found his temple. The sound was hollow, sickening, and he fell to the ground without making a sound. I stood there panting, his blood splattered on my face, the metallic smell invading my nostrils. The world seemed to stop. I looked at the lifeless body on the ground, at the improvised weapon in my hands. I had taken a life. The monstrosity of the act hit me with the force of a wave, and I vomited right there in the filthy alley. There was no justice in that act, only the rawness of revenge. In that moment, I knew that the soul of Maria Ortega, the teacher, was lost forever. It is a terrible truth when you realize that to fight monsters, you must become one. If this dark journey resonates with your own pain or outrage, know that your subscription gives me a reason to keep narrating, so that no story like Sophia's is ever forgotten. The shock gave way to a survival instinct I didn't know I possessed. With a terrifying calm, I wiped my fingerprints from the tire iron and threw it into a dumpster. I went through Ricardo's pockets, my hands still shaking but my brain working with glacial clarity. I found his wallet and, more importantly, his cell phone. That small device was my next clue, the key to finding the other names, the other faces that made up my daughter's nightmare. I got back in my car, hands steady on the wheel, and drove away from that alley, leaving behind not just a body, but the last particle of the woman I used to be. I was no longer a victim. I was the consequence. The days following Ricardo's murder were a blur of paranoia and adrenaline. Hiding in the same fetid motel room, I became a voluntary prisoner, studying his cell phone as if it were a sacred text. The messages, the photos, the contacts, it all formed a sick map of the organization that took Sophia's life. I discovered a network of men connected by a casual brutality, human traffickers hiding in plain sight. The teacher in me re-emerged, not to teach, but to analyze data, to find patterns, to turn information into weapons. Every name I wrote in a new notebook was a nail I would hammer into their coffin. Grief still tore me apart inside, but now it had a purpose, a direction. Pain was the fuel that turned the gears of my revenge. The next name on the list was a man named Hector. According to the messages on Ricardo's phone, he was the recruiter, the one responsible for luring young women with promises of jobs and a better life. He was the liar who painted a paradise to mask a hell. It took me a week to find him. He worked as a security guard in a downtown parking garage, a place of shadows and concrete, perfect for the kind of dirty work he did on the side. This time there would be no improvisation. I spent days watching his movements, the route he took home, his daily stop at a convenience store. The hatred I felt was colder, more controlled. The fever of the first murder had passed, replaced by an icy determination. I prepared myself with the care of a surgeon. I bought gloves, a cheap wig, and dark clothes from a thrift store. The tire iron was replaced with a hunting knife, quieter, more intimate. I waited for him on a moonless night in the alley behind his apartment. When he appeared whistling a carefree tune, a chill ran down my spine. He didn't see me until it was too late. I pressed him against the wall, the cold blade to his throat, and whispered the question that would become my signature. "Do you remember Sophia?" The terror in his eyes was the answer. This time there were no screams, no clumsy struggle. It was fast, precise and silent, and as I watched him fall, I felt a frightening emptiness. The satisfaction was fleeting, replaced by the weight of another soul on my conscience. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, Ricardo's body was finally found. To most of the cops, it was just another addict killed in a bar fight. But Detective Miller wasn't convinced. The brutality of the attack seemed personal, and the fact that nothing was stolen intrigued him. Something in his veteran cop's gut told him this crime scene was just the surface of something much deeper. He started reviewing the files, the incident reports from that week, and that's when Maria Ortega's name jumped off the page. A murdered young woman, case closed. The dead man in the alley was one of the unlocated witnesses at the time. The coincidence was too great to ignore. Miller started digging, to the annoyance of his superiors, who saw it as a waste of time. He revisited Sophia's file, read the statement from her mother, Maria Ortega, and an image began to form in his mind. He saw the pain in her eyes, the silent frustration. He pulled her immigration records and found that she had not returned to Mexico. A grieving mother, an indifferent system, and now one of the suspects in her daughter's death had been brutally murdered. The pieces began to fall into place, forming a dark and disturbing puzzle. Miller was no longer investigating an isolated murder. He was on the trail of a ghost, a shadow moved by a grief he could barely begin to comprehend. My next target forced me to be bolder. He was a lawyer named Marcus Thorne, the gang's facilitator. He laundered the money, bribed officials, and ensured the organization's crimes remained unpunished, hidden behind a facade of respectability in an affluent neighborhood. To get to him, I would need help. My search led me back to the border, to the underworld of the coyotes. I found a man named Javier, known for his discretion and for a debt he owed to an old friend of my family. I didn't tell him the whole truth, only that I needed to move between the two countries undetected, that I was resolving a family matter. He saw the desperation in my eyes and agreed, without asking too many questions. Javier became my eyes and ears on the border, an unlikely ally in my solitary war. His information allowed me to cross the desert at night, avoiding patrols and sensors, moving like a phantom between the two worlds that now defined my existence. Mexico was a painful reminder of what I had lost, a refuge for my wounds. The United States was my hunting ground, a cold, impersonal land where I carried out my mission with growing efficiency. Each crossing hardened me, each mile traveled in the desert under a blanket of stars pushed me further from the woman I had been, transforming me into something forged by sand, night, and blood. The hunt for Marcus Thorne required a new approach. I couldn't use brute force. I had to use his own arrogance against him. I created a false identity, that of a businesswoman looking to clean a large sum of money, using a burner phone and information I stole from Hector's phone. I set up a meeting in his office, a skyscraper of glass and steel that seemed to mock the dirty world below. Dressed in elegant clothes I bought with the little money I had left, I walked into that temple of impunity, my heart pounding, but my face a mask of calm and confidence. I was a predator disguised as prey, walking into the wolf's den. Inside the luxurious office the air was thin, heavy with the scent of leather and power. Thorne was exactly as I had imagined, charming, impeccable in his expensive suit, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He spoke of numbers and percentages, completely underestimating the woman sitting across from him. As he described his illegal operations with veiled pride, all I could see was my daughter's face. Imagine the terror she felt. When he stood to pour a drink, assuring me we were safe, that his walls only had ears for us, I made my move. The silencer I'd bought on the black market with Javier's help did its job. It was clean, professional, and terribly empty. Meanwhile, Miller's investigation took a leap forward. Hector's murder, with the same signature of personal violence, confirmed his suspicions. Two low-level members of the same criminal network, both linked to the closed case of Maria Ortega. He began to profile the killer, someone methodical, intelligent, and driven by revenge, someone who knew the victims. His gaze settled again on the photo of Maria Ortega in his file. The teacher, the mother. The image didn't fit that of a cold-blooded killer, but the pain in her eyes told another story. Miller felt he wasn't hunting a monster, but a broken person, and that deeply troubled him. The death of a prominent lawyer like Marcus Thorne sent shockwaves. The police treated it as a professional hit, likely a mob cleanup, but Miller saw the connection no one else did. He went to the crime scene and found something tiny, almost invisible, left behind near the body. A small button from a simple blouse, the kind not found in luxury law offices. It was a mistake, the first mistake of his ghost hunter. He pocketed the button, feeling he was getting closer. The hunt was becoming personal for him too, an obsession to understand the woman behind the violence. Back in Mexico, in a safe house arranged by Javier, I felt the weight of my actions. 3 lives taken, 3 more steps down into my own hell. The image of Thorne's shocked face, the way his body slumped over the mahogany desk, haunted my nights. I was becoming efficient, lethal. The hesitation I felt with Ricardo, the nausea I felt with Hector, they were fading, replaced by a grim acceptance of my new self. I was becoming the very embodiment of the vengeance I sought, a force of nature as relentless as the desert that surrounded me. The line between justice for Sophia and the darkness growing within me was becoming dangerously thin. I knew I had to keep going, that the job would only be done when I reached the top of the food chain, the man they all feared, known only as El Carnicero. His name appeared in whispers in the messages I found, always associated with the cruelest orders. He was the architect of my daughter's pain, the mastermind behind the operation. To find him, I would have to dive even deeper into the darkness, to risk whatever humanity I had left. The hunt had transformed me, and I feared the woman I saw in the mirror, whose eyes reflected the same coldness as the men I hunted. This point in my journey, the question that haunted me every night was no longer why, but who have I become? Justice for my daughter had become a suit of armor, but underneath it, vengeance was the flesh and blood that moved me. I no longer know where justice ends and revenge begins, or if there ever was a real difference. If you understand this darkness, if you have ever felt that line blur inside you, your subscription to this channel is a reminder to me that perhaps there is still a light worth fighting for, even if I can no longer see it. Your support helps me continue to share this truth, however painful it may be. The news of Thorne's death put El Carnicero's organization on high alert. Fear began to spread among them. They didn't know who was hunting them, only that it was a ghost who struck from the shadows and vanished without a trace. I used this fear to my advantage. I started leaving subtle clues, anonymous messages, creating an atmosphere of paranoia that made them make mistakes. They turned on each other, suspecting betrayal, while I, the true threat, watched from a distance, patiently waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike again, to get ever closer to my real target. The hunt had become a game of psychological chess. On the other side, Detective Miller used the button found in Thorne's office as his main lead. A lab analysis revealed it was from a brand sold almost exclusively in small towns in northern Mexico. He cross-referenced this information with Maria Ortega's hometown. It was a long shot, a hunch, but he convinced his superiors to let him pursue it. He traveled to Maria's town, a fish out of water in the dusty, suspicious environment. He wasn't there as an arrogant American cop, but as a man searching for answers, trying to understand the tragedy that gave birth to an avenging angel. In her town, Miller spoke to the people who knew Maria, the school principal, the neighbors, the parents of her former students. They all painted the same portrait, a kind, dedicated woman, loved by the community, completely devastated by the loss of her daughter. The image of a ruthless killer seemed impossible. It was then that he met Father Miguel, the old family friend. The priest, with his wise, sad eyes, did not confirm Miller's suspicions, but his cryptic words about pain that transforms and justice that heaven sometimes leaves to the hands of men were a silent confession. Miller left that church certain of who he was hunting. Taking advantage of the chaos I had created, I identified my next target, El Carnicero's right-hand man, a violent enforcer named Sombra. Finding him was my greatest challenge. He was a phantom, just like me. I used a low-level gang member as bait, leaking false information to lure Sombra into a trap. I set a meeting in an abandoned warehouse near the border, an isolated place where the confrontation would be inevitable. It was a risky gamble. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to the past, but actively shaping the future, forcing my enemy's hand. The night of the meeting was cold, and a biting wind blew from the desert, whistling through the cracks of the warehouse. Sombra didn't come alone. He brought 2 henchmen, and I was outnumbered. The confrontation was a chaos of brutal violence. It wasn't clean or quiet. It was a desperate fight for survival. I used the environment to my advantage, the stacks of old crates, the darkness. One by one, I managed to neutralize them, my body, moving with a primal instinct that pain and rage had sharpened. The fight left me wounded, with a deep cut on my arm and my body aching but victorious. Before delivering the final blow to Sombra, I interrogated him. I pressed the knife against his wound, demanding to know the location of El Carnicero. Pain and fear made him talk. He gave me an address, an isolated ranch on the American side of the border, the sanctuary where the monster hid. With the information I needed, there was no longer any reason to keep him alive. His death was a final stop in my search for information and the beginning of my last act. The path to the final confrontation was finally open, but the price had been high. My body was wounded and my soul ever more fragmented. As I fled the warehouse, little knowing that a security camera at a nearby gas station had captured a blurry image of my car, Miller received an alert. The DNA found on the button from Thorne's crime scene had been processed. There was no match in the criminal databases, but they managed to extract a partial genetic profile. It was only a matter of time before they got a warrant to compare it with a relative. The hunt was narrowing. He had a profile, a hometown, and now forensic evidence linking her to one of the murders. The net was closing in around me. It was during a secret visit to Father Miguel, seeking bandages for my arm and perhaps a little absolution, that he confronted me. He saw the emptiness in my eyes, the wounds on my body and in my soul. "Maria, this is not you," he pleaded, his voice thick with sorrow. "God's justice is patient. The vengeance of men is a fire that consumes everything, including the one who wields it. Stop before there is nothing left of the woman Sophia loved so much." His words were like knives in my heart, for I knew he was right, but I had come too far. To stop now would mean that all the blood, all the pain, would have been for nothing. The priest's plea, however, planted a seed of doubt in my heart. For the first time, I began to question my endgame. What would happen after I killed El Carnicero? What would be left of me? Vengeance had given me a purpose, but it was a hollow one, leaving me emptier with each step. The transformation was almost complete, and I feared that by killing the last monster, I would simply take his place in the abyss. The journey to destroy evil was turning me into the very thing I despised, and the awareness of this terrible irony was my newest torture. It was Javier who brought me back to reality. He showed up at my hideout with urgent news. My face was everywhere. The blurry security camera image, Miller's investigation, it had all culminated in a wanted alert. I was no longer a ghost. I had a name and a face, and I was the most wanted woman on the border. The American police, the FBI, and worse, El Carnicero's gang were all hunting me. Time had run out. I had to act now, make my final move before they found me. The hunt had been reversed. I was, once again, the prey. With the walls closing in around me, my plan became simple and suicidal. There was no more room for subtlety or strategy. It was a frontal assault. I would use everything I had left, of strength, of anger, to storm El Carnicero's ranch and finish what I started. It was a one-way mission. Either I would kill him and likely die in the process, or I would be captured and spend the rest of my life in a cage. Either way, Maria Ortega's journey was coming to an end. I looked at the worn photo of Sophia, kissed her smiling face, and prepared for the final battle, no longer for justice, but for an ending. El Carnicero's ranch was a fortress of arrogance in the heart of the desert. Lights shone from the main house, a stain of opulence in the infinite darkness, but the security was complacent, confident in its isolation. I used that confidence to my advantage. I moved through the shadows, an apparition of dust and revenge, my aching body protesting every step. The desert wind was my only ally, muffling the sound of my breath, of my feet crushing the gravel. Every guard I bypassed, every camera I avoided, was a step closer to the heart of the beast. The pain in my arm was a constant reminder of the price of this war, but the image of Sophia's face was the force that propelled me forward, through the fear, through the pain, towards the final confrontation. I found him in a spacious office, with glass walls that overlooked the dark desert. He was not a grotesque-looking monster, but a middle-aged man, elegantly dressed, enjoying an expensive brandy while listening to classical music. He turned slowly, unsurprised. a cold smile on his lips. "Maria Ortega," he said, as if expecting an honored guest. "The teacher. I must admit you have exceeded all my expectations. You've caused me quite a headache." There was no fear in his voice, only the curiosity of a scientist observing a fascinating specimen. He saw me not as a threat, but as a phenomenon, and that sickening calm was more terrifying than any show of force. He gestured to a chair. "Sit down. Let's talk. After all, we are alike, you and I." He walked across the room, brandy snifter in hand. "We both discovered that the world is ruled by will, not morality. I built an empire on that truth. And you have become a legend. Do you think you are here for justice? For your daughter? No. You are here because you discovered you are good at this. You enjoy the power, the hunt, the fear in their eyes. You did not come here to avenge her death, Maria. You came here to feel alive again." Every word was a poison, designed to corrode my conviction, to make me doubt the purity of my pain and drown me in the darkness he represented. His taunting broke my self-control. I lunged, and the calm of the office exploded into violence. He was stronger, heavier, but I was faster, driven by a fury that burned away all my wounds and exhaustion. The fight was savage, a whirlwind, of bodies crashing against expensive furniture, shattering glass and works of art. He fought with the cruelty of a sadist, I with the desperation of a mother with nothing left to lose. I used a paperweight from his desk to strike him. He used his belt to try to strangle me. It was a macabre dance, the civility of his luxurious life being torn apart by the barbaric truth he had inflicted upon my world, now returned to him twofold. I managed to get him down. The knife I had taken from my boot pressed against his neck. His smile was gone, replaced by a snarl of hatred and surprise. He was gasping, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. In that moment, I was the power, the sentence, the end. And it was then that blue and red lights flooded the room, dancing across the wreckage. The door burst open. "Drop the weapon! Now!" Detective Miller's voice echoed, firm, desperate. He stood there, his gun aimed at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of pity and duty. The system that failed me had finally arrived, but too late, and now it saw me as the monster that needed to be stopped. Time seemed to freeze. I had the architect of my pain under my blade. Behind me, the law that had denied me justice. "Finish it, teacher," El Carnicero whispered, his voice a gurgle of blood and defiance. "Show him who you are. We are the same." Miller's voice was a counterpoint. "Mrs. Ortega, Maria, don't do this. Don't become him. Let justice take its course." Justice. The word sounded like a bitter joke. What justice? The one that returned my daughter to me in a cardboard box? The one that filed her life away as a statistic? I looked at the blade, at the man who destroyed my world, and at the officer who represented the order that allowed this destruction. The choice was mine alone. My entire journey, every life I took, every tear I shed, it all culminated in that instant. I looked directly at Detective Miller, and in my eyes he saw not hesitation, but a terrible finality. There was no more conflict. I was the consequence, and my purpose had to be fulfilled. I ignored his pleas, ignored the world outside of that moment of reckoning. With a firm, decisive movement, I plunged the blade. The sound of the gunshot came an instant later, but it wasn't from Miller's gun. It was from my own backup weapon, which I fired into his leg to incapacitate him, ensuring he couldn't stop me. His cry of pain mingled with El Carnicero's last breath, and then silence, broken only by the sound of approaching sirens. The handcuffs closed on my wrists, the cold metal against my skin. I did not resist. As the officers led me out of the ranch, past the body of the man I had hunted for so long, and past Detective Miller, who looked at me with an expression of pain and confusion, I felt a strange calm. The fury that had consumed me for months, the fire that moved me through deserts and dark alleys, simply extinguished itself. What remained was a profound silence, an immense void, where an overwhelming purpose once was. My personal war was over. I looked up at the night sky, the indifferent stars blinking over the desert, and for the first time since Sophia's death, I felt nothing. The mission was accomplished, but the woman who started it was irretrievably lost somewhere along the way. My story exploded in the media, a dark tale that fascinated and horrified the nation. To some, I was the border butcher, a monster who reveled in violence. To others, especially the forgotten communities living under the shadow of crime, I became La Profesora, an avenging angel, a folk saint who delivered the justice the system denied them. My actions, though officially condemned, forced a massive investigation into the human trafficking network, exposing corruption that reached high levels of law enforcement. The crimes I committed led to the arrest of dozens of other monsters, saving countless future Sophias. I lost my freedom, but my revenge, in a twisted, bloody way, ended up creating the justice I never had. Detective Miller visited me only once, months later, when I was already in a maximum security prison. He wasn't wearing his badge. Sitting on the other side of the glass, he didn't ask me questions about the crimes, but simply looked at me and asked if it had all been worth it. I did not answer with words. I just stared back with the same empty eyes he had seen in that police station so long ago. He understood. He told me that because of my case, the department had reopened hundreds of files on missing immigrants. He was trying to fix the system from within. Before he left, he said something I'll never forget. "You did the wrong thing for the right reasons." And I knew that he, too, would carry the weight of that night forever. I was sentenced to life in prison, my name destined to become a footnote in the annals of crime. But on the streets of the border towns, my story became a legend, a warning to the predators who hide in the shadows. They say that on windy nights, the ghost of a teacher still walks the desert, hunting those the law cannot reach. My body is locked in a concrete cell, but my legacy, the consequence of my actions, roams free. I found no peace, no redemption. Vengeance did not bring back my daughter, but it gave her death a meaning, transforming the silent scream of one victim into an echo that would shake the foundations of indifference. My journey ends here, within these four walls, where the only memories that visit me are Sophia's smile and the faces of the men I sent into darkness. I do not ask for forgiveness, only for understanding. A mother's pain can be a terrible and transformative force. If my story has taught anything, it is that you cannot ignore human suffering indefinitely without a response. I thank every one of you who subscribed and listened to me until the end. You bore witness to my pain and ensured that Sophia's memory was not just another dusty file. Continue to listen to the voices of the forgotten, for it is in their silence that monsters thrive. Goodbye.